Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to Rock and Roll Religion, where we've got a really good episode for you today. We are going to be talking the early career of one of Germany's greatest metal bands of all time, still going strong to this day over 40 years later. And pretty much, along with the Scorpions, the heart and soul of the German hard rock and heavy metal scene, pretty much since its inception. We are talking the Teutonic Terror themselves. We are talking Accept. So this is going to be an excellent one. These guys are really solid band. Formed in 1976 in the town of Solingen in Germany, with a rotating cast of bass players, rhythm guitarists, and drummers over the years. But two of Germany's greatest and two of the legends of heavy metal in their craft of all time, in my opinion, vocalist Udo Dirkschneider and Wolf Hoffmann on guitar. One of the best V players I have ever heard, right up there with Michael Schenker and the great Ken Downing from Judas Priest. And speaking of Priest, there's a lot of that in here early on, especially. You could tell that they took a lot of influence from not only them, but a lot of other NWO BHM bands when they first came out. And they kind of adapted that into their own sound as they went. Before we really get into it, I do have a link down in the comments. If you do like the channel and want to support it directly, I do have a Stream Elements link over there, and I will check that at the end of the episode if anybody sends me a donation. So with that all being said, you can find me every Sunday here doing this little show of mine. And then usually on Mondays for That 70s Rock fans, it's only Talk and Roll, where tomorrow we're going to be doing a tribute to Ray Stevenson. So that's going to be a great show. So be sure to tune in for that. With that being said, let's get right into it, man. This is an outstanding early career for them, with a little bit of a dip towards the end. So you might hear me actually trash talk an album for once. Mostly because it's vastly overrated, in my opinion, but we'll get there. And like I said, coming out in 1976 in Germany, they do have two albums previous to this one. They're not very widely available, and good luck finding them. The first one is self-titled, and then the second, I'm a Rebel. You can find later editions of it, but good luck finding the original. They are not very common because they weren't very commercially successful at the time, and the band was kind of struggling at this point. And then they came out with this one, Breaker, in 1981, where this was their first real album that kind of hit with people. And it's easy to see why. They went with more of a generic hard rock and heavy metal sound that was really popular in the early 80s. A huge influence from bands like Judas Priest, Motorhead. There's a lot of AC/DC in this one. A lot more hard rock than the rest. And I do like it for that reason, because I'm a huge hard rock fan. So we will get into the track listing a little bit here. Starlight, I actually really like as a opening track. It's fast, it's happy, it's upbeat. It's really, really solid hard rock and heavy, and with a lot of excellent guitar riffs from Wolf Hoffmann, and that's going to be a running theme here throughout the band's entire history. The man is just a machine. I'd put him up there with Tony Iommi when it comes to writing catchy riffs. The man's just awesome. Second, and my favorite track on this record, is the title track, Breaker. I mean, it's another one that you can hear the sound that would come to define Accept kind of being created on this record, and this is one of the ones that stands out with that, where they're going a little bit more fast-paced, double bass. They're moving towards what would be called later speed metal, which these guys are one of the pioneers of, mostly on their next record, which we'll get to. But absolutely stellar track, really enjoyable. And moving on to Run If You Can, Another really solid upbeat standard 80s heavy metal tune, and you can hear a lot of Judas Priest in this one. Like, obviously it's 1981, everyone had just heard British Steel and everyone saw what the reaction was to that record, so a lot of bands were trying out that sound and see if they could make it work. And I feel like this area, like, the hard rock heavy metal sound, which is fast and loud, is where Udo Dirkschneider's voice really shines, because he doesn't have a traditionally good voice. He's not smooth, he's not polished. It's pretty much just fast and loud, which is exactly what you want for something like this. Moving into the next one, we have the first real problem with this record, and it's something that they kind of do on all of their records in this period. I'm pretty sure this was like an industry standard at this point. There has to be a down-paced power ballad or something on a record, and yeah, it's on this one. It's not great. They have some ones later that are pretty decent, but this one, I wouldn't say avoid it, but it's definitely one of the filler tracks on this record, if you want to put it that way. And then moving into not the best song on this record, but certainly the catchiest and most offensive, being Son of a Bitch. Very, very catchy lyric and riff again. Very easy to remember, very easy to get out there, and pretty solid track too. It's not the greatest thing ever, but it's a fun song and I enjoy it. And if you're into the hoisting a middle finger at authority, then so will you. Burning, another great one. Again, they bounce back and forth between 80s heavy metal and hard rock here, and this one's pretty much a straight up rock and roll tune. This is pretty much straight 1950s rock and roll cranked to 11, and I really enjoy that because it's a great sound. And I love this period of music in that heavy metal hadn't gone too far from its rock and roll and blues roots yet, and you can hear that really strongly in this album specifically, although their later albums have some elements of that as well. So if you're a fan of that, like hard rock, heavy metal, like borderline, this is going to be an album that you definitely want to give a listen to. Feelings, another one, straight up kind of anthemic rock song. Not the heaviest thing ever, but it doesn't have to be. It's pretty much perfect for what it wants to be, which is a song about, playing heavy metal and rock and roll. And that's what a lot of this stuff is. It's just getting out there, having fun and playing rock and roll. And we enjoy that around here because I do the same. Midnight Highway, another one kind of like Heading Out to the Highway by Judas Priest, which is interesting because this album came out in the same year. I'm not sure which one came out first, but very similar lyrical content, very similar mindset behind it. And we'll get to that record in its own time, because that's one of the hidden gems of Priest's career, in my opinion. And Midnight Highway, again, it's a great driving song when you're out late and just want to go fast. That's exactly what this is made for, and that's exactly what it does. Breaking Up Again, not the greatest track on this album. The last two are kind of filler, but they kind of fit with the whole pattern of the record, and it does create a pretty interesting product, if not as consistent a one as we see later from them. Their sound is kind of evolving at this point. This is an album where they're throwing a bunch of stuff that they do out there and seeing what works. And at least with the sales of this record, most of it did. Breaker did pretty well for them. I think it went gold, which is an interesting one. So their first really successful album that got them noticed outside of Germany itself. So that was a good first outing, and the second one they were swinging for the fences and really hit it. Restless and Wild is where I consider the beginning of Accept's real sound starts. Like, they have identified what works. They're getting faster, more aggressive. On here, you're going to hear a lot of speed metal, especially the first track in here with "Fast as a Shark." This is one of the songs people point to as the beginning of speed metal, and I don't disagree with them. It's fast as fuck. It is loud as hell, and is just straight ahead, balls out heavy metal. And that's what you're going to hear a lot on this. Ahead of the Pack, really solid track. A lot of thrash influence here. You can hear a lot of the evolution of what would become thrash metal right about the same time that bands like Metallica and Venom and other ones were really making that sound popular. Not that Venom is thrash metal, but they had a huge influence on it. And, probably coming from the same place of Motorhead, where it's faster, you have that loud double bass, you really start hearing a lot of the influence here. And less of Priest, although there's still quite a bit of it in here. Neon Nights, not my favorite track on this record. And Demon's Night isn't fantastic either. They're both kind of slower paced and kind of downbeat. And I don't think Udo Dirkschneider's voice works for that kind of sound. That's where the weaknesses in his voice start to show quite a bit. And unfortunately, there'd be a fair bit on here. Don't Go Stealing My Soul Away. Pretty decent hard rock and heavy metal tune. Pretty average overall. Restless and Wild itself, fantastic track. And I've got the track order wrong because they listed them wrong on here, and I'm just going left to right. So this one's going to be kind of a shotgun. Restless and Wild, great fucking heavy metal tune. Again, faster and more aggressive than usual, which I like to see. And you can start to hear a lot of what would make Accept going forward kind of gelling here. Shake Your Heads, another fantastic one. Get Ready is possibly the best track on this record outside of Fast as a Shark. Again, really hard, really fast, heavy Priest influence here of just straight ahead heavy metal, and there's not really a whole lot of frills there. Flash Rocket Man, another one, pretty hard rock tune, fantastic. And then at the last point, we have a song I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for, but I really just don't dig it. Princess of the Dawn. It's considered one of Accept's classics, and I can't think of why. It's kind of down-paced. It doesn't really build to a whole lot. It's not bad, but I would not put it as one of their greatest achievements at all. It's just kind of there. I don't really enjoy it that much. I know a lot of people do, so I'm in the minority on that one. Oh well. But this album got a lot of people sitting up and paying attention to this band in 1982, and a lot of people were starting to not only pay attention to them but emulate them, and that's where you start to see a lot of speed and thrash metal start appearing in the ether of rock and roll and heavy metal at this point in the early 80s. So yeah, Fizz, I mean, some of their faster stuff is great, but when they're just kind of playing or a low tempo, they're hit or miss with me in this period. Later on, these guys are fucking lights out. Their new stuff sounds amazing, and we'll probably do a stream on some of their newer stuff because they're one of the battering rams bringing old school heavy metal back to the fore in the 21st century, which I'm really glad to see. And not just newer bands creating 80s style heavy metal, but old bands coming out and just saying, yeah, we can still do new stuff that sounds this good 40 years into our career. And that is a special skill. And hey, Lord Thoth, praise be. Um, and again, you have Wolf Hoffman to thank for that specifically because after 1986, Udo Dirkschneider was fired or quit the band, depending on who you ask. Again, it's one of those he said arguments that you can never really tell what the truth is. And they've gone with a different singer. Although Udo did come and he started his own band called UDO, which is another one that we'll probably get to at some point because some of it's pretty fucking good. But yeah, and the name is very generic. I don't know really what they were thinking with Accept. The name they came up with before this was even more generic with Band X. So not the most creative bunch when it comes to naming things, but musically they're pretty out there, and I like it because these guys were basically leading the charge for more of the fast-paced speed metal that would come out in the 80s. And moving into from this one, they had what became their biggest seller to date, and the one everyone knows, and probably, in my opinion, their most overrated record. That being Balls to the Wall. I just re-listened to this, right before the show, and I don't get why people rave about this record. I mean, some songs are pretty good. I don't hate. We'll get into the track listing here. London Leather Boys is actually a pretty good tune. Fight It Back is good. Love Child and Turn Me On are both pretty good. Losers and Winners is back to the speed metal of Restless and Wild, which I enjoy. But other than that, it's kind of slower. Some of it's really heavy, which is okay, I guess. But a lot of it is just they were trying to do something a little different, and I guess it works for a lot of people. It really doesn't for me. Balls to the Wall itself, yeah, it's a great, fist pumping song, but to me, it doesn't stand out from the crowd in terms of, metal anthems of the early 1980s. I would much rather reach for, Breaking the Law or something like that rather than Balls to the Wall. Like if it's on, I won't turn it off. It's still a listenable song, but it's just not my favorite. These guys get a lot better later, especially the next record, which I unfortunately didn't have time to go into in depth. Metal Heart, which we'll get to in another show because that is absolutely outstanding, and really where this band comes alive to me. But yeah, I mean, again, I just don't see why out of all of their records, this specifically over Restless and Wild would be their big record and the one that really broke them into the mainstream. I guess it has a lot of more generic stuff that people who aren't hardcore metalheads will appreciate. So maybe that's why. But I just heard it and went like, yeah, it's good. I'd give it a solid 6.5 or 7. It's above average, but it's not, all-time classic, the best thing this band's ever done. Then again, I say the same thing about British Steel from Judas Priest. I love the record, but I don't even think it's in my top 5 from them. So again, you have this band who's not part of the NWO BHM movement, but really heavily influenced by it, kind of coming into their own later and really succeeding and rivaling some of them in some ways. These guys were certainly a huge influence on thrash coming in. Because like this came out in 1983, and the next year you would have Kill 'Em All by Metallica. A whole bunch of early thrash records were released in '84, And Bonded by Blood by Exodus was 83, so that's a contemporary of this. So this is where you're starting to see metal kind of branch out into its own genre, not instead of just being, rock and roll harder and faster, which I enjoy both for their own things, but I really dig this period where you're starting to see bands branch off left, right, and center and do their own thing. Some of them founding entire genres in the process, bands like Venom or Bathory, um, or Metallica in a lot of cases. And it's a good, solid record for this period, or a good, solid output for this period. I wouldn't call them exceptional yet, though. See what I did there? Um, and with that being said, I may go back into these in further depth, maybe with a guest at some point, and maybe play you some of this stuff over on Rumble, where I can actually do that without getting immediately copyright struck. But that about does it for this one. I didn't have a lot to say on these guys, mainly because I was anticipating Balls to the Wall being a lot better than it was. I know people rave about the record, and it's one of their biggest hits. So I figured there'd be a ton of great stuff on there, and instead, there's really just not. I will say that Udo's voice is great for most of the things this band does, but not all. He's not a polished, very smooth voice. It is really rough and raw, and that has its own advantages. But Wolf Hoffman, I think, is the real star of this band as the guitar player, because that man just knows how to shred, and he does it with the best of them. And in later years, he would absolutely prove it. But I don't think this period is really the one to look for. It has its moments. Restless and Wild is definitely worth a pickup. It's an excellent example of early Accept doing things well. Like I said, if you're a hard rock fan, the first album, Breaker, is excellent. Has a lot to love there. Balls to the Wall, I can't really recommend. I just didn't have that great of a time with it. But with that all being said, take care, stay safe. I love you all, and I'll catch you next time.